inappropriate. And that's not something that would happen.
That was the sheriff/attorney speaking. Did you hear him say, oh, they were in a fight. They were in a fight, because he's trying to convince you that Keeven was kicking ass. But let me explain why I don't buy that. Nobody bought that, because his first and second cervical vertebrae were separated in his neck. So there's 7 vertebrae in the neck. The first and the second was separated, which means he was most likely paralyzed from the neck down. Not only was he most likely paralyzed from the neck down, that's an injury that is most oftentimes fatal. He also had his left vertebral artery was lacerated. That is the artery that supplies blood to your brain, blood to your spinal cord. So he wasn't getting any blood to his brain or his spinal cord. Most likely, he was paralyzed from the neck down. He was also in cardiac arrest, and he had also had an asthma attack. So what kind of fight really was Keeven in? Now, this encounter lasted all of 5 minutes. And, he was asthmatic, and he had ran out of the car. And it was a brief foot chase. So when Sheriff Lopinto is trying to convince everyone that his officers were in the fight of his life, no, they weren't in a fight, the fight of his life, because we're talking about a 4-on-1 situation. And they were saying, oh, his hands, we couldn't get his hands. He was, resisting. Remember this 14-108 resisting arrest. He was resisting. Resisting what? Could he move? Could he move at all? All of this happened within 5 minutes. We're talking about Keeven leaving the gas station, going to LeBar and Lurline, getting out of the car, and just a little bit of a chase, a little bit of a foot chase there, maybe a minute. And he's talking about Keeven was resisting. If he was resisting, how long did he resist before he went into cardiac arrest, the asthma attack, being paralyzed from the neck down, and not having any blood going to his brain and his spinal cord? And brace yourself for the details of the autopsy report. Seriously, brace yourself. It's pretty graphic, but also it's pretty sick, because Keeven had an injury to a certain part of his body that is just unexplainable. It just doesn't make any sense. That's something that had to have been intentional, in my opinion. But before we get into that, let's take a look at this autopsy report. In section 1, it talks about the bilateral scleral hemorrhages. That's to the eye. The scleral is the white part of the eye. Bilateral conjunctival petechiae. That's kind of like the little pinpoint hemorrhages. Hemorrhage of the soft tissue of the anterior neck. Traumatic separation of the hyoid bone and the thyroid cartilage. Section 2, blunt force injuries. A, head and neck. And so they're going to detail everything here. So 1, abrasion of the forehead. 2, bilateral periorbital contusions. That's, contusions around the eyeballs. 3, contusions of the face. 4, subscapular hematomas. Hematomas are clots. 5, hemorrhage of the soft tissue of the left side of the posterior neck. 6, lacerated left vertebral artery. 7, separation of the first and second cervical vertebrae. And 8, epidural hemorrhage overlying proximal cervical spinal cord. That's just section 2A, 1 through 8. To start, so when Sheriff Lopinto is saying there was a fight, who was winning the fight? This brief fight that produced all these injuries to this man. Because remember, the 911 call started at 10:07. And there's EMS, that's being called in. And they're there within a few minutes. The entire situation from the gas station to him going about a block away to him getting out of the car running, and his encounter with these 4 officers produced all of these injuries. Okay? So let's move on to his torso. Abrasions, this is section B. This is actually, pardon me, this is section 2, and I just gave you A, 1 through 8, and now we're on B, his torso. Abrasions and contusions of the chest and abdomen. 2, soft tissue hematomas of the chest, back, and bilateral buttocks. C, extremities, abrasions and lacerations of the bilateral upper extremities. 2, soft tissue hematomas of the bilateral upper and lower extremities. Okay? So that's all in section 2. So he's got injuries everywhere. His eyeballs, his face, his torso, his chest, his back, his butt. He has injuries everywhere, but the sheriff would lead you to believe that Keeven won the fight. He did not win this fight, and it shouldn't have happened. It was unnecessary. If you have GPS tracking on someone, and you're going to have tracking on that person per the court order for another 24 hours, what was the reason for you to chase him and kill him? Because there's a reason why he ran. We'll get into that. I think that's episode 4. I could have never guessed when I sat down with these documents that it would turn into an 8-episode series. But the more I read, the more disturbed I became, the more pissed off I became. But let's complete this examination of the remainder of the autopsy. It's sick what these folks have covered up, in my opinion. This is nothing but a cover-up. Roman numeral 3, acute asthmatic exacerbation. A, history of asthma. 4, Roman numeral 4, toxicology results. A, blood screen. And so you see the list of medications that were in his system, the THC, no alcohol. So there are blunt force injuries to his head and neck. His left eye, eyelids, his left cheek, the right side of his forehead, his right cheek, his temple, temporal scap area, his upper lip, lower lip, his neck, of course. And I understand that he was in a prone position. He was face down. We get that. So when they dissect his neck, layered dissection of the anterior neck reveals marked hematoma surrounding the bilateral digastric and mylohyoid muscles, predominantly on the left side. There is hemorrhage on the proximal left sternocleidomastoid, sternohyoid, and thyrohyoid muscle. There is hemorrhage on the left carotid artery sheath. There is a 1.5 centimeter separation of the hyoid bone from the thyroid cartilage. So there's a lot in this autopsy report. There are too many tongue twisters to even name. But it's sick, it's sad, it's disturbing, it's infuriating. But when you read this report and you just see how massive the injuries were, how deep in the muscles some of the injuries were, and on page 4 of 8 of the autopsy report, I see towards the bottom of that there was also some injury to his private area. Removal of his bilateral, which means both sides, left and right. His testes reveal hemorrhage, more prominent on the right ball. And I'm just trying to figure out how in the hell does he get an injury to his private area? This was 5 minutes of an encounter. And he, in my opinion, was basically beaten and choked to death. And there's an injury to his private part, to his testicles. There's scleral damage to his eyes. There's injuries everywhere. So drop down in the comments and tell me what you think after learning that he has damage to his private area, to his right and his left testicle, more prominently on the right. Do you honestly think that everything that was done that day was in accordance with Louisiana law and with their policy and procedures? Do you think, how do you imagine he sustained an injury to his testicles? How? His eyes. And this isn't Keeven's eyes, but this is what a scleral hemorrhage looks like. So explain how Keeven, he has sustained all of these injuries, but he's still able to squirm and move and fight and resist. And the blood of Keeven Robinson is on the hands of so many people. So many. I'm just trying to figure out what this 26 means. What is that code for in law enforcement? I'm trying to understand why Detective William Whittington, didn't inform the 911 operator that he was actually pulseless. I'm trying to figure out why Sheriff Lopinto is trying to give the impression that he called in so many people, the Louisiana State Police, the FBI, and others, to assist with this investigation. But when there's a further examination of the documents, I find out that the Louisiana State Police was actually quite limited in the assistance they provided to this investigation. But again, nothing is as it seems. But as you see, on May 16th, 6 days after Keeven Robinson was killed, the Louisiana State Police, they were out of it. But Sheriff Lopinto would lead you and the public to believe that the Louisiana State Police was, thoroughly involved, the FBI, the Department of Justice, and we know now we certainly can't trust the Department of Justice after what they did to Ahmaud Arbery's family. In episode 3, I take a closer look at the Louisiana State Police and their involvement in this investigation. And if they wanted to block Keeven in, why did he pull up on the side of him instead of directly in front of him? Was that intentional? If you wanted to block him, there was a unit behind him. You could have simply pulled up in front of him. There was no place Keeven could have gone at that point, right? Instead, you pull up on driver's side of Keeven. Then he drives off. These are two unmarked units. Yep. And besides that fact, some of these officers have a reputation for beating suspects. In fact, one of them beat a suspect until he urinated on himself. So the community knows that once they are apprehended, that it is likely that they could be beaten until they urinate, or possibly worse than that, on themselves. It's not, unheard of for folks in this community to run from these particular cops, because everybody in the neighborhood know who patrols their neighborhood. They know the dirty cops. They know the ones that plant dope. So I understood why he ran. There are plenty of suspects who have ran from these particular officers. I think this is a good point to conclude this particular episode. But in episode 3, we're going to get into this investigation that I find lacking in a lot of areas. And we're also going to examine Agent Spadoni, Agent Brister, Agent Bordelon, and Agent Lowe in their histories. If you haven't liked the video, take just a moment to click like. It would mean a lot to me. Support a smaller content creator today. Share this video with someone. Leave a comment if you can answer any of the questions I posed. I would really appreciate it. And a big, big thank you to all of you who who have subscribed to my channel. And Louisiana and Mississippi, it looks like we're in for another rough night or two. I'm so sick of these tornadoes, I don't know what to do. As soon as I go in my backyard and take everything in the garage, then I have to go back and put it back in the backyard. Then I have to go to the backyard and put it back in the garage. That's how the last 2 weekends have been for me because of this Turcon 7. But hopefully it won't do us as dirty as it did last week. And don't forget, safety first. You cannot outrun a tornado. I don't care what you're driving or how well you can drive. Always think safety first. I've been in a tornado before. I am so paranoid. When I looked at the Weather Channel tonight and saw that school was out tomorrow, I was like, damn, not again. But I have faith we'll be all right. So I'll talk to you later, Shag. Good night.